When the elders speak of spiritual insights, remember that it's because they know beyond what we can see. These next scenes may appear a little graphic, but I promise you'll be well taken care of while Sulia and Yingxue stumble upon discoveries and continue to unfold where their story started from long ago. Chapter 4. The Longing. This is goodbye. The next boat arrives in 2 days. I'll make sure. Wait, how long have I been gone? I interrupted, not wanting to miss a thing. A day, Yingxue replied, observing me carefully. I pushed back, breaking his embrace, feeling out of place. I really thought I had been gone for a long time, but had it really only been 1 day? Previous events entered my consciousness, and I remembered the last time I was here. I was lost and had chosen to follow a group. We were ambushed by Pathet Lao soldiers, and Captain Blancchang fled the scene. Captain Blancchang, is he a good man? Was the first thing I needed to ask. Yingxue zipped up his backpack and swung it over his shoulder. He turned towards the horizon where mountains guarded the greenish lake. He is a part of the corruption that's taken place since the war. For years, trail paths and village locations were leaked to the communists, leading to many innocent Hmong villagers and refugees dying in vain. This is why I vowed to stay and help my people escape the corruption, in order to prevent losing more lives. Yingxue picked up a rock and swung it fiercely across the lake, where it skipped 4 times before dropping beneath the surface. I couldn't bring my shattered spirit to Thailand alone while the remains of my parents is under the soil of Laos, and many others are being hunted down like animals. This is another reason why you need to make it to that next boat, and remember to trust no one. I walked up to his side. Captain Blancchang's dark eyes came to mind, and the thought of him ignited me with anger that seeped through every inch of my bones. I won't forget those black, eerie, unsympathetic eyes and the bloodshed he caused his own people. His desire for survival was nothing but a cold scheme and betrayal. I tightened my lips and told Yingxue, I'm not getting on any boat. I want to share a common ground on your vows. The people you want to save are mine too. He turned to catch my gaze, his expression troubled. You must get on that boat. I can't guarantee your safety if you stay here. I'm not worried. I looked up into the sky as soft gray clouds started to form. I don't understand any of this, and I feel confused about coming back here again. But now, I want to have a purpose. Making me leave won't do me any good. Yingxue held his breath and stared at me with a look of concern across his face, like I was making a crazy decision. I grasped the bottom of his shirt, clutching a fist against his abdomen as he continued to regard me with disapproving eyes. The stubbornness in my tone had been clear, and I could see his face. It registered with him that I wasn't changing my mind. Whether in dreams or reality, I was still the same person. So where do we go now? I said, looking away, beginning to walk. Yingxue didn't bother to argue. He understood I had my mindset. Moments later, he caught up with me. We'll walk south to catch up with the other group of people, where a few of my unit members will be waiting. I only stopped again, waiting for him to finish. I kept on with my pace until I realized he had finished talking altogether. So, you came back to find me? My heart filled with hope. He was reluctant to answer, which was typical of him, but I could see the flush in his face. He wasn't used to showing the nature of his thoughts to just anyone. Why haven't you asked where I went then? I purposely asked. Where you go is not important to me, as long as you don't get yourself killed, Yingxue muttered, but his cold words were undermined by the worried expression he retained. Rather, he looked agitated about losing me for a day. Slightly smiling, I answered, Good. I wouldn't know where to start anyways. We walked for a long while under the warm sun, maneuvering in and out of the jungle and along different trails. Sometime later, the jungle grounds turned into moist green vegetated soil. We came upon what felt like a magical view of deep red poppy flowers trailing along the downside of the mountain. The beauty of the moment was an extraordinary bliss of escape. Faster and faster, my steps quickly transitioned to a run, and before I could think about what I was doing, I was already thrashing through the field. Air weaved through the flower petals, while straws of green wheat swished against one another, brushing my bare legs. As I twirled, hands thrown to my side, flowers touched my fingers. My vision streaked in shades of yellow, orange, and red. The colors bled into the evening sky like soft flames of fire. Yingshua trailed behind me. In each of my twirls, I captured expressions across his face that I'd never seen before. Seemingly, a side he only showed when he assumed no one was looking, although he didn't quite allow his lips to form a smile. His eyes gleamed in ways that suggested he had 1,000 words he wished he knew how to express. I turned around and noticed Yingshua lunging over with a sudden change of mood. He grabbed my wrists with an immediate jerk. "Get down!" I heard footsteps of people heading in this direction. He warned firmly. The wishful bliss I had been experiencing disappeared in an instant. Panic hit my face at the realization we'd been followed and were now under surveying eyes. In short breaths, Yingshua squeezed my shoulders as we heard foreign languages speaking from a closing distance. "Did you see them come in this direction?" we heard one of the soldiers ask. "Yes. Keep on searching," a familiar voice answered. It was Captain Blancpain. My eyes narrowed. It was no surprise he had brought the enemy. Yingshua nodded while staring at me carefully. Beads of sweat glided down his jaw and dripped along his Adam's apple. He swallowed hard and proceeded to pull his Hmong knife out of its wooden sheath. My heart sped at the sight of the extremely sharp-looking blade, but I knew it was a necessary defense weapon. We listened carefully. The crisp sound of military boots breaking through the wheat field, with flowers being crushed under their steps, was getting closer and closer. I stayed as quiet as I could, and just as I saw Yingshua was ready to strike, rain started drizzling. Within seconds, the weather turned into a downpour. He abruptly stopped and continued to wait. We both listened with keen ears. "Let's head back," shouted Captain Blancpain to his men. "We'll look again tomorrow. These people are not far from here." Yingshua dropped his body back onto the now wet ground with big breaths, like he was relieved he didn't have to kill anyone. The quick shift of weather saved us from being discovered. "Yingshua," I called out while shivering at the coldness seeping through my skin. "Are you okay?" He blinked and looked up at me, only to realize I had been talking to him. He sat up and quickly helped me to my knees. We crawled through the wet field and onto the foot of the mountain where we could see an abandoned farmer's hut further up. "Let's take shelter there," Yingshua pointed before taking my hands into his. We used all our strength to hike up the elevated trail until we finally reached the bamboo hut. The dwelling was tiny and very thinly made, but sufficient to fit the both of us as we sat and waited for the rain to stop. He pulled out a small white candle and lit it. By now, it was much colder, and the only thing we could see was the bright orange-red glow of our faces. I folded my knees up against my chest and wrapped my arms around them, propping my chin over my knees. My lips shivered, and I could taste small cracks of blood from where they had become dehydrated. Yingshua gave me a long look. He shrugged off his backpack and quietly sat across from me. He set the candle down between us. "Give me your hands," he said, pulling them slightly above the flame. To my surprise, his hands weren't cold at all, and mine slowly began to warm as my fingers sat between his. "Where is your village?" I'd wanted to ask him this for a while. Yingshua lifted his eyes to meet mine. I gazed intently with an eagerness to know more about him. Staring down, the flames dancing across his wavering dark eyes, he began. I don't know of a place to call my home. My parents raised me in a small village in the southern mountains of Laos only until I was 10. Both of them suffered from diseases and passed away when our town was burnt by the communists. Since then, I have been on my own and have learned to hunt for food and to survive however I can. My mind drifted off while he told his story. Yingshua lived through life on his own accord, with no one to lean on, fending for himself all these years. And while throughout his journey he experienced grief, sadness, and loneliness, he always kept a straight face, pretending he was tough. In moments when he should have cried, he didn't. And in times when he was hurt, he never showed it on his face. He was forced to grow up by himself and witness the corruption of even some of his own people colluding with the enemy. Although draining at times, he kept going day in and day out to help his people survive because of his drive to fulfill the freedom and peace he wanted for them. He was selfless. Yingshua let out a small cough and sniffed a little. "Are you not feeling well?" I asked in concern as he let go of my hands and leaned his head against the wall. "I'm okay. We have a long way to go tomorrow. You should get some rest." He folded his arms across each other and closed his eyes. Then I noticed a small ray of moonlight that caught my attention from the seams of the hut to my right. I was reminded of the first night we met. Even though it was hard to see each other's expressions, I could always sense when his eyes were closed, his ears were still sensitive to my every movement. "The moon is full and bright tonight," I commented, but received no response. Shortly, I heard his hands fall to his side with a thud. "Yingshua?" I looked over to him and saw his whole body shaking in the dimness. With haste, I crawled to him, reaching for his forehead beneath his wet hair. He was growing a fever, and his face was turning pale. "You're burning up," I told Yingshua, and quickly grabbed a small tan towel from his backpack. The coldest water I could get was from the rain, so I soaked the towel, squeezed it, and came back inside to lay it across his forehead. I held the towel in place for a few minutes, and Yingshua's head fell against my shoulders. The towel dropped to the floor and into the darkness. I couldn't find it. "Sulia," Yingshua called out faintly. I listened closer, but he didn't finish his sentence until seconds later. "Will you stay?" Yingshua asked calmly before shivers took over his body again. Immediately, I embraced him. "I'm not going anywhere. Why would you worry about that during a time like this? What if we might not meet again?" "We will." I tightened my lips and patted his back. He was the complete opposite when it came to sleeping. It was nice to hear his thoughts for once. Yingshua lifted his head, like he realized my knees were wobbling as I tried balancing his weight. He attempted to sit up, but I pulled him forward and offered my lap for him to comfortably sleep on instead. "Here, keep this on your forehead." I finally found the towel and placed it over his head again to help him get back to sleep. All night, I slept with my head against the wall with a stiff back. I listened to the crickets and tree bugs cry from the cold nature around us. I began to miss home and would have loved to open my eyes like any other time in my nice fluffy bed. But if I were to continue to stay in this reality, I wouldn't think twice because I wanted to be there for Yingshua, who had no one. Chapter 5. The Stone. The birds sang from the outside as the morning light glared into the hut. I sat up frantically, having realized I hadn't woken up in my bed like I thought I would. I was alone, with a black jacket draped over me, even though I remembered Yingshua had been sleeping on my lap the whole night. Quickly, I opened the door and jumped from the hut that was set about 3 feet off the ground. "Yingshua?" I called out, making sure I wasn't too loud. I tried his name a few times. I walked faster and faster down the hill before coming to a stop. Yingshua was sitting by a stream. He must have woken up early to go and catch some fish. Next to him, he had put up 2 sticks and a string to dry his clothes. I noticed my pink blouse and jeans next to it. I stepped into the cold sand. So, you are here. The air blew through my bangs. Yingshuo looked up and handed me a cooked fish on a stick. Eat, so you won't starve. I heard your stomach growl all night, and I couldn't sleep. Embarrassed, I replied, well, I'm glad you had enough sleep then to be up so early. He obviously was unwilling to admit he had been completely out of it while I slept sitting up all night. I'll gladly take the payback with food, thank you. I assessed him for a bit in search for signs of his wellness since I remembered how much he had shivered the night before. Don't worry, I'm better thanks to you, he said, acknowledging my concern. You're welcome. I sat down to eat, and shortly after, I changed out of my vintage Hmong clothes and offered them back to Yingshuo. Here, this was a lovely outfit. Yingshuo stood up without taking them and walked away. It's yours. Keep it. Huh? Baffled, I watched him toss a bowl of water to douse the fire. There is a family who will be meeting us along the way. They will sit out with us. We should reach my other unit by evening if we don't encounter any issues, Yingshuo said with caution. I nodded, finished eating, and we set off just as quickly as the morning sun rose from the horizon. 4 hours into walking under the scorching sun, we noticed a foul smell. It became stronger as we got closer. We peered further down and kept on hearing a voice calling after their mother and father. Gunya. Gutsi. We were met by the haunting sight of a body lying at the side of the road for what had seemed like days underneath the heat of the sun. The young man's head was twisted to one side, like he'd been struggling for hours. What happened to you? Yingshuo touched his head and asked. I'm in so much pain, the young man said between faint breaths. His eyes were bulging out, begging for his life to be saved. His tongue was white from dehydration. Tell us, who did this to you? A choking sensation caught in my throat at the sight of blood from his stomach, where it looked like he had been stabbed multiple times. Not our people, the young man said with his last breath before passing away with eyes darting up to the sky. Yingshuo grimaced painfully and slowly closed the boy's eyes shut. He stood up, reaching out to help me when he noticed my legs were weak. As we left the poor boy and walked along the narrow road to find the village, we encountered other bodies like his. It was such a hard experience to go through, and we wondered how many people from the village had been killed in this way. If Captain Blancchang wasn't responsible, then it must have been thieves. Upon reaching the village, it was like a ghost town. No one was in sight except stray dogs crossing our way and a wisp of dirt blowing by. I heard a crying voice suddenly, and I grabbed Yingshuo by the wrist, pulling him towards the sound. Be careful, he said, moving in front to take the lead. Gupa, Gupa, Gupa. The girl kept on wailing for her grandma. Please, don't leave me too. A house at the far end of the village had the door opened. We stepped inside to have a look. Startled, the little girl in a blue dirty dress hugged her grandmother, who was lying in bed. Please, don't take my grandma. No, we are not here to do you any harm, I responded calmly. The grandmother turned her head a little. Her eyes were milky, with cataracts, but she could still see enough to know people were around her. Who's there? Holai? Stay behind the bed, the old lady said in a raspy voice. She looked like she'd been bedridden for days and had only just started to come back to her senses. Yingshuo noticed one side of her face was heavily bruised, like someone had beat her. Dried bloodstain, a corner of her forehead. Here, drink this. Gently, Yingshuo crouched down to the side of the old lady, elevating her head with one arm so he could pour water slowly into her mouth. Young man, we were in shocking terror the morning before. She began telling her story in traumatic tears. The moment I heard my granddaughter come running and crying that both her parents had been killed, I immediately hit this child to save her life. I dropped to my knees and grieved, praying to the heavens to protect us. They can steal all of our food and take all our water, but give my son and my daughter-in-law back to me. She wailed for a long while in Yingshua's arms as I held Huolai in front of me by the shoulders. Tears wouldn't stop dripping from my eyes. The anger in my heart at hearing her story was indescribable. Sadness weighed heavily in our chests, and we knew we couldn't just leave them in such a poor state. With that, Yingshua and I made the decision to stay a few days. While Yingshua was out feeding the chickens, pigs, and cows, and made 2-hour trips to carry heavy buckets of water back to the village, I stayed with the old grandmother and Huolai to help them around the home. It's healing better today, I said, applying green and yellow medicine herbs Yingshua had brought back from the woods to her forehead while redressing her head bandage. You remind me of my daughter-in-law, she said with trembling lips and eyes full of grief. I'm sorry, was all that I could reply to her. She had lost her entire family except her granddaughter Huolai, who was only 8 years of age. There were no words I could say to heal her heart other than to help her regain her strength and nourish her mentality. During that time, we learned that there had been about 10 families. Half of them had left the village for Thailand a month prior, and the rest had decided to risk staying for the sake of their livestock. 4 families, including her son and daughter-in-law, were all killed, and the family who was stabbed along the way back to the village was the one we were supposed to meet and take with us. Here, have some water, Yingshua said, handing me a tin cup. I brushed the sweat off the side of my neck, looking up at him as he held a hand out to block the hot sun from my face. The days had been very humid. It was nice to be outside to help wash the old grandmother and her daughter's clothes and blankets. I learned to make them a few meals in between, burning my hands a few times in the process. Yingshua was definitely better at the house chores, especially the cooking part. The short days with him was like having a family, something I hope to have myself in the future. As I was taking gulps of water, I noticed Yingshua staring at me with soft eyes, like he was lost in a daze. I tilted my head and teased, "You look like you want to help me wash these clothes." Yingshua blinked and glanced down to see a bucket full of water, soap, and clothes mixed with blankets. He grabbed a small wooden chair from the inside of the home and sat down next to me in front of the entrance. "Don't your fingers still hurt from the burns?" he asked, dipping his hands into the cold, bubbly water and stopping me in the process of working. "I'm okay. They don't hurt anymore. As you can see, I'm not a proper Hmong girl, obviously not a cook, and I've only learned how to hand wash these clothes recently. But all these experiences are things I've come to appreciate the most. Back home, I only knew to go to school and study." "The place where you are from, what is it like?" Yingshua asked. To my surprise, the man who rarely asks about my whereabouts was interested to know. I continued to squeeze and twist the clothes inside the deep wooden bucket. "Where I'm from is very different from here. There are many tall, shiny glass buildings in the city that reach the sky. We have vehicles and multiple lines of transportation that are programmed to take us to places without a need to drive them. We have machines that wash our clothes for us and clean our homes. Manual labor is less needed, you could say. The technology where I live is far from here. We have multiple devices that are multifunctional, where it provides direction to take us to places, allows us to explore what they call the internet for many things. The device can teach us how to cook with recipes, and we may contact our families and friends with just a voice command." I stopped for a moment to remember my mother's cheery face. "I do miss home." Yingshua stared off, deep in a thought. It was quiet suddenly. Did I say too much or overwhelmed him? I wondered. "I'm sorry that you have to suffer here with me until you return to your home. It must not be pleasant to be here," he commented in a sad, remorseful tone. "This dream certainly feels real. I'm unsure when this journey will come to an end, if it ever does. but one thing's for sure. You make me feel at home," I assured him, so he knew I was not disappointed. Yishua's eyes widened like he was ready to say something, but he held back. Surely, he was happy to hear my response. Shortly after, I noticed a shiny piece of stone dangling from a deep red leather necklace Yingshua wore around his neck. Closer inspection revealed it was not only blue, but also had gold fire-like twists that feathered across its asymmetrical profile. "I've never seen anything like this before," I said, reaching up to touch it. Yingshua removed it from his neck and held it in his fingers. The stone was the last gift I received from my father before my parents passed away. They told me it was a protection stone. He dropped it into his palm and squeezed it. It's been unusually warm against my skin lately, like an energy runs through it. "That's because the stone is special, child," the old grandmother commented from her bed. We quickly rinsed our hands and went to check on her. "Are you awake and feeling better?" I asked, grabbing a hold of her hands as she got herself up. "I am feeling better, my dear," she said, grinning and causing crow's feet wrinkles to appear around her eyes. "You said the stone was given from your father, young man." "Yes. Father gave it to me after he returned from war, saying it was a stone that fell from the sky," Yishua explained. "The stone is special, child. As an old shaman, I've seen these while walking through the spiritual world. It's a sacred stone from the stars, a gift of protection against misfortune. The energy manifest in the mineral gravitates to spiritual and physical awakening. It is also a blessed piece that can bring forth love and reconciliation in a timeless manner." "Must be why you both have met," she said, beaming from me to Yingshua. "But I must say, it has a lifespan. Unlike stones that live for hundreds and thousands of years, this one is the rarest due to its fragile profile and hollow inner depth. You see those fine lines?" Yishua handed it to her as she looked at it with squinty eyes. "This is a measure of time," she explained. "This is all I know. The rest is up to fate." The old grandmother took my hands into hers and continued. "Celia, I usually can sense how strong a person's spirit is. Your heart feels, your eyes see, your body moves, and yet your spirit is barely clinging to your body. If you make a decision, make it wisely, child," she told me. "What does that mean?" I asked quickly, keeping my eyes on Yingshua. "Don't worry. When the time comes, you'll know what to do." She smiled and patted my hands. "Grandmother says you're both leaving tomorrow," Huolai said, coming through the door with sad eyes and changing the atmosphere. "Yes, we are." I brushed my hands over her soft head. "Let's make you dinner so you don't sleep hungry." Later on that evening, Yingshua and I finished drying the clothes and blankets and made dinner. There wasn't much to make, but some rice porridge with chicken was quite delicious. "You're both really setting off tomorrow, child?" the old grandmother asked while I fed her. "I saw Yingshua come to check up on us. Are you sure you don't want to come with us?" he asked. "This is my home. I will remain here until the coming of my day." Huolai said she won't leave me, even when I've urged her to go with you, she replied. It was sad to hear her words, but she spoke with a happiness in her voice that made us feel better about leaving. "Your granddaughter is a blessing," I told her. Her hands touched my shoulders. "And so are you to him." Yingshua looked up at me, flustered and visibly shy. My vision is not the best, but that only strengthened my other senses. "She's a rare find too. Don't lose her again, young man," she said, turning to Yingshua to remind him. "I am more in debt to him than anyone knows. I am the one always being lost and found by him," I joked, while feeling silently surprised that the old grandmother seemed to have known more about us than we did ourselves. Yeshua only smiled and stood up to face the old grandmother and told her, "Please take care of yourself, and thank you for your hospitality." The old grandmother nodded. You both have been more than helpful to me and Huolai. We will most certainly miss you and are grateful for all that you have done for us. The innocent souls of Tao Village have been given proper burials and will bless you for your kindness. Roosters crowed the next morning and we were ready to leave. Yingshua had his usual black backpack and I made a cloth bag for myself to pack the clothes, some dried fruits, and food. Huolai purposely woke up early and came running to give us hugs. Take good care of your grandmother. She will depend on you a lot going forward. I know you are so strong and mature for your age. When we come back in this direction, we'll make sure to pay a visit. I patted Huolai on her head and her face lit with happiness. We parted ways and I couldn't help but take one last look at Tao Village as we left. I wanted to breathe the new air one last time. Thankfully, the breeze flowing along the road, trailing leaves in its wake, kept away the reek of death. Since we're going deeper into the jungle, you'll need this more than I do, Yingshua said, opening his hands to reveal the blue and gold stone. I stared up at him with questioning eyes and blinked as he bent down and whispered to my ears alone, "Be good. Don't wander off again." With that, he secured the pendant around my neck in silence and walked off ahead of me. "Wait, but this is yours," I called out after him, but he only waved for me to hurry along.